looks right, throws a deep pass, right side, end zone, it's caught, it's a touchdown. And the Cardinals continue to pour it on.
Welcome to Cardinals Underground.
All right, if it wasn't for the video aspect of Cardinals Underground, gentlemen, I actually was thinking about doing a shout out to former Cardinals receiver Andre Roberts as an intro here. Paulie Podcast, Darren Urban, Kyle Odegard. But since you can actually see me, I couldn't blatantly or patently lie about the fact that I wasn't bench pressing a couch. Did you see Andre Roberts and how his special teams coordinator expressed dismay, surprise, shock, if you will, that Andre Roberts didn't have any home workout equipment? And that Andre Roberts, there was a video of him actually using a couch as a lifting apparatus, that he was actually working out, lifting a couch. And so I thought, you know what? I mean, that's so Rocky IV, right? I mean, that's feats of strength. Kyle, am I wrong on that? I mean, you go around, you just start bench pressing stuff in your house. Well, it's a pandemic.
I have no idea how I missed this. There's a video of him bench pressing a couch?
Well, I couldn't find the video. Apparently, It was shared internally on a Zoom call between Andre Roberts and the coach or the players of the Bills. But the coach couldn't believe you're a 10-year plus NFL veteran. Invest in some weights.
Yeah, it's not like this is an undrafted rookie who's got no money in the bank just trying to make the league. Andre Roberts has been around for a long time, but I like the ingenuity. I mean, if there's nothing to do, you got to bench press a couch.
Andre was always one of Fitz's guys. I'm surprised Fitz didn't hook him up with some kind of, especially I'm sure Fitz knows somewhere in the world some distributor of weight equipment that he could have helped him out with.
That's right. Andre probably bought some weight equipment in like Peru when he was traveling with Fitz, and he just had a problem shipping it home. Or you could be like me here at Paul Calvisi. I have weight equipment, except now I use it as door stops, and I'm using a big weight outside to keep the patio umbrella from blowing over. Stuff like that. It's actually useful when you invest in the home weights. There's other uses than actually getting in shape, as I prove here. Another downside, actually, I have the video component of Cardinals Underground. That's for sure. All right, so Darren. Speaking of Larry, and he was speaking to the offseason, and guess what? The offseason is over. Larry pretty much made it sound like he doesn't need no stinking offseason, at least a traditional offseason NFL style. But get us up to date on where the Cardinals are, or they aren't right now exactly when it comes to the offseason.
Well, I mean, it's over, Paul. I mean, it's the rookies are still going through some meetings, but the veterans have basically been told, this week, which would have normally been the minicamp week, the big mandatory minicamp, the one time that they all come together and they get their physicals and they have the mandatory minicamp, and then they kind of disappear for the off season at the end of the week. Obviously, none of that is happening because of the pandemic and all those things. So Cliff Kingsbury wrapped it up last week in terms of the virtual meetings, and it makes some sense. DJ Humphries was telling us that. Those meetings were fine when you're able to kind of break it up and buffer it when you're actually breaking down the film of watching yourself during the OTAs and what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong. And now it's just straight book learning, and that can get a little monotonous. And I can understand where he's coming from, and quite frankly, I can understand where Fitz is coming from, where he basically said he doesn't miss any of the offseason, but that's not really he's never really kept that as a secret, Paul, and you know that. But at the same time, for a guy who, as a veteran, going to mostly voluntary, the fact that it's mostly voluntary all off season, he's almost always around. So he can talk a big game about how he doesn't like it, but he still has always shown up to work, and that's what makes Larry Larry.
And Larry knows where he needs to be. I mean, literally. I mean, Kyle, you'll like this. He actually registers all his numbers during his drills in the off season. Darren knows this. You go up to Minnesota and he has all those drills. He's been doing the same drills for more than a decade. He has his times from when he was 25, 27, 31, 32. So he knows where he's at and where he needs to be. So as long as you know the playbook, as long as you have a comprehension of the offense, for example, then you know what? It's up to you to get yourself ready for an NFL season.
Yeah, I think guys like Larry Fitzgerald and all the veterans of his ilk, the offseason, take it or leave it. It doesn't matter that much. I think they do it just to kind of keep the camaraderie and show the team they're invested. But how much do they gain? I think the bigger deal is for new players on the team that are trying to learn the offense, young players who are trying to get bigger roles, and the evaluation standpoint from the coaching staff, where we're talking about not having tape where the players can learn from it, but also these coaches can't evaluate anything. And I know it's shorts and you don't really know how good a player is until camp, but I feel like if you're looking at receivers or cornerbacks, foot speed, ability to get separation, all that sort of stuff does show up in the offseason, and that lack of evaluation could really hinder some of these teams going into camp.
That's a good point. I mean, if you think back, Jerron Brown, for example, an undrafted rookie free agent, you could tell right away that he was going to challenge in the offseason. You had David Johnson. He was 3-4 days into camp, and guys are already like, man, this guy can play. Look at the size and the speed of a David Johnson, a third-round pick. Tyrann Mathieu, who you remember, Darren, a couple of days into just the rookie mini camps, players are already like, wow, there's a guy in that backfield who's making a lot of plays. Even though a lot of it was half speed, there was already that ability to impress. And then if you consider that there are reports out by NFL insiders that they might reduce the preseason, man, it's going to be tougher than ever. If you're a guy off the radar to try and make an NFL 53 this year, that's going to be tough.
I keep thinking about all the coaches and players, quite frankly, that have always talked over the years, like, this guy is more of a physical learner. He learns it on the field. Or players will say, I learn better when I'm in the middle of it doing it rather than trying to learn it in the meeting room. You don't know who any of those guys are if they're new, because they haven't had the opportunity to really show it. Or maybe a rookie is like not really, doesn't seem to be picking it up in the classroom, and you're freaking out. I'm like, oh, maybe this guy is going to end up being a bust, and yet he gets out on the field, and once you show him on the field, he's totally fine. You don't get to see any of that. So I'm super curious about how all this plays out. Your buddy, Chris Streveler, I mean, here's a quarterback, might be doing some other stuff. The OTAs would have been that place where, okay, he's from the CFL, kind of where might he fit in here? We like the idea of having a guy like that, but where might he fit in? We're not going to see any of that. And how much time do you get to play with a guy like that and the roles he might have in training camp when you're going to be desperate to get everybody who's going to be playing a lot up to speed?
Just remember, the leveler is a gamer. Okay, just remember that the practice, okay, it's great. You just got to wait till the lights come on, and you guys are going to be so thankful for the leveler in the fourth quarter of these preseason games. Just believe me on that one. Well, you could check back in August, Kyle, and thank me then.
I'm still assuming Hall of Fame trajectory for Streveler, even without the offseason, maybe early setback, but I'd assume first ballot Hall of Fame.
So as I ignore that, Matt Nagy made the comment, because the Cardinals weren't the only ones to end the virtual offseason early. You saw Sean McVay do it. You saw Mike Vrabel do it with the Titans. Matt Nagy, I think, was the first one. He kicked the Bears early, a good week and a half before they were supposed to end. And Nagy's comment was, well, we got so much done, ... To me, Kyle, it was, you can only get so much done, ... That would be the honest, truthful translation to that, right? I mean, there was a ceiling how much you could achieve in a virtual setting.
Yeah, the thing I like about Cliff Kingsbury, like he's pretty succinct and he's not going to be too colorful, but he's honest about things. And he basically said, yeah, we've run out of things to talk about. And he didn't spin it as we've had this incredible off season. It's just like, yeah, we're out of ideas. I think he actually implored the media to give him ideas if we had any. But he's just being honest. Like, they're not on the field. How many times can you go over, how to run a slant and how to do a 5-step drop and protection schemes? So I appreciate that he's just like, yeah, this is a different offseason and we're going to cut them loose, because why keep guys if you're not learning? You may as well just give them that freedom if it's not being productive time.
Although it wasn't for lack of effort, right, Darren? Weren't there a lot of pop quizzes, according to DJ? Right? I mean,
that's what Humphrey said.
I mean, I saw like some teams were using, I think it's called Quizlet, some sort of software. Maybe the Cardinals use that. I have no idea, but you're going to keep guys. We all had that class. We all had that teacher in school where if you thought there was the possibility, the prospect of a pop quiz coming that day in class, yeah, your focus was sharpened a little bit more. And it sounds like the Cardinals try to do that. We know Vance Joseph ran sort of a virtual walkthrough where he put up the X's and O's on a screen and then called out members of the defense, said, okay, if the receiver motion's here, you do what? And he started calling on guys out of the blue. So they tried to hold players accountable, make sure they were in their books. And then B, I take it they're trying to decipher, okay, to Kyle's point, who's got a mastery of this and who is struggling and might be a liability out on the field.
Again, this is all, new territory with having to do it this way because of the reality of COVID. And we still don't know exactly what that means going forward and how training camp's going to look. And, as you guys noted, that the preseason might be shorter. So if you have fewer games, what does that mean? We don't even know exactly how practice might look in terms of, are you going to be asked at some point to keep some of these guys separate from each other? Are you going to be able to work them together 11 on 11 as much as you would normally do? Which is, if you don't do that football-wise, I'm not really sure how sharp you can really be. I know earlier in the offseason I talked about comparing it to the 2011 offseason, and I do feel like there are some parallels. But the more I thought about it, the difference is like how sharp are you going to feel once you get to games that count? Because whatever happened in 2011, at least you did have a full training camp, and you had enough you had enough practice time and preseason games. So we'll have to see how that goes.
You get into camp and all of a sudden your dogs are barking. You've been on your feet a lot. We know how that works, so to speak.
My headset didn't block that out.
No, we heard it.
But
roll with the punches, Paul.
John Harbaugh. There's we're not stopped recording here. There's no edits. This is straight. Boom.
This is all clean.
That's right. This is Bill O'Reilly. I write it. We do it live. That's exactly the way it works around here. Now, Kyle,
we've gone like 7 podcasts without a bark. I was pretty proud of them. I'll have to give them a talking to.
Yeah, if somebody took the under on Kyle's dogs, then you're in the money right now. There's no doubt about that. I think John Harbaugh's words, after looking at the 70-page manual of protocols per the pandemic, and his words were, it's not humanly possible to achieve a lot of what the NFL is seeking. And I get it, Kyle, but it does seem sort of a futile effort in a way if, okay, you're going to have 6 feet of space in the locker room accordingly, and people are going to be wearing masks and practicing all the protocols, which is great. I'm on board with that. But at some point, you got to play football. And football is the most contact sport on the face of the earth. So and we've seen it with these college programs where even in the conditioning work, the college programs come back. All of a sudden, they've had a number of positive tests for COVID. And I know Roger Goodell had a couple of things to say about that. Yes, it's going to happen. I guess the question is, how do you deal with it, and how effectively can your roster cope with what you hope is just the occasional positive test?
Yeah, that's such a big unknown. And I just feel like, there's protocol and there's thoughts in place, but I think we just have to keep in mind that the fluidity of everything that's happening, and we don't know where we're going to be in a couple months, but that's a very valid question. Like, what if guys do come down with coronavirus during the season, and how does that affect your team? And what if it's a star player, and what does that mean? So I think there's a bunch of unknown. I think they're just really trying to take this step by step, but there's going to be a lot of hurdles, I think, that every team is going to have to face, and really just trying to adapt the best way possible, because we are definitely about to head into uncharted territory.
For example, Bruce Arians said he's thinking about keeping his third-string quarterback permanently quarantined, keep him out of the quarterback room. So if, God forbid something happens and you get a rash, a positive test, and it hits your quarterback room, the coach, the first and second string, at least you have somebody who's qualified to be under center who can run your offense for a couple of weeks, for example.
Are you trying to say you're going to have Chris Streveler just hang out at your house and keep him safe?
What we're saying is that you're right. That might be his automatic ticket to the final roster. You're right about that. That might actually happen. Hey, the Streveler, being from the CFL, he's used to isolating. Put it that way. He's used to not having a lot of fans either. So that whole aspect of things. Speaking of getting,
he won a Grey Cup. They had a parade in downtown Winnipeg. there were plenty of fans loving some Streveler, the leveler.
Well, when the guy's wearing a fur coat and he's shirtless, with a cowboy hat on, and it's some 13 degrees out there, absolutely, that's going to draw fans from all over.
We've officially talked about Streveler 5 times as much as Kyler Murray and Larry Fitzgerald combined.
Yes.
You're right, Kyle, and that's the segue because Minnesota pretty much shares a border with Winnipeg. Come on now. So
you're a pro, Paul.
That's our segue there. You and then that connection, geographical. So, Darren, Larry has been spending a lot of time in Minnesota, which would make sense, his native state, and considering everything that's been going on there. And he has been a participant as well with his 12-year-old son. Fill in some of the blanks there and what we learned recently from Larry.
Well, and we talked about it a little bit last week when Fitz did his first-person essay for the New York Times talking about racism and police brutality. But he ended up meeting with the local Arizona media later in the week and, talked about being in Minnesota, wanting to go back there, wanting to talk to everybody, whether it was activists in the Black Lives Matter movement or police or politicians who are in charge of trying to fix this through the laws. So he went back, he had those conversations, and part of it was his son Devin, when they got back, they had a lot of discussions over what was going on in the world, and Devin told him that he wanted to go take part in the protest. So Larry took him to a protest in Minneapolis. So I think that's important. I think it says a lot about Larry Fitzgerald as a parent. And, as a parent of a young Black male in this country, I'm sure Larry is going to have some conversations with him just in terms of being smart out there because of what everything's going on. But I do think Larry approached it really well. He talked, like he did in his essay, he talked a lot about trying to bring people together, which is kind of how Larry Fitzgerald operates. And he is spending a lot of time there. He did say he was going to get back to Arizona. He did drop in there that he's trying to work with Kyler Murray, so Kyler throws a little bit with some of his receivers going into training camp. But right now, when we talk to Fitz, and not surprisingly, his life was all about where we are with Black Lives Matter and the protests and trying to heal some of the hurt that the country is going through right now.
You can imagine how many members of the media reached out to Larry for comment. He touched on that. And what I didn't realize, because that's not unexpected, I didn't quite realize, Kyle, that he grew up approximately a mile from where the death of George Floyd occurred. So it's understandable that he wanted to take some time, gather his thoughts, and formulate exactly what his reaction would be. And if you had a chance to hear or read your guys' stories and listen to some of what Larry said, it was incredibly thoughtful and some of the best insight that I've read on the topic in general, period.
I think it was very impactful, and you're right. Thinking to myself, like if something like that happened within a mile of where I grew up and grew to not only a national story, but international and sparked worldwide protests and conversation, it's a very heavy thing. And I thought it was interesting that he said he didn't want to give interviews so other people could take his words and write what they wanted to write using his quotes. He wanted to do first person and write down exactly what he thought. So it was very clear. And like you said, he thought about it for a long time. So it was good to know where Larry Fitzgerald stood on it. And he spoke up, about racial equality and injustice and police brutality. And it's a side that we don't get to see very much from Larry Fitzgerald. And I think it was impactful.
And the holy cannoli stat that came out of that was the number's 107. 107 countries Larry has now visited. And he cited that as evolving his view just on humanity and just seeing people from literally all walks of life, every corner of the globe, and just realizing humans are humans, and how he hopes at some point everyone can see what he has been able to see via his travels. So I thought that was insightful as well, Darren.
Yeah, I mean, the 107 countries doesn't really shock me, Paul. I mean, we've been around him his whole career, and that was always something he wanted to do. I remember doing a story on his travels back in like 2007, and obviously he's been to a ton more places in the 13 years since. But, I think that's one way to have a person kind of understand where other races and other religions and other whatever are coming from, is to interact with them. And, fortunately, Larry has the bank account and the time to be able, and the willingness to want to go pretty much anywhere in the world. And I've talked to Larry before. It's interesting because one of the reasons he loves traveling so much is because he can go someplace, and a lot of these places, they don't know who he is. And he enjoys the idea of going and being kind of incognito and not have somebody recognize him for who he is. And so he can go and really become part of wherever he is for those few days or week or whatever it might be. And I think he has a great message in terms of how race relations should be. Now, whether we can get there as a society as easily as you would hope, that's more of a twistier path to go, I think, right now, because there's a lot of deeply embedded thoughts on a lot of sides. But I'm hoping that Larry, having a guy like Larry Fitzgerald at the forefront trying to make some of this work, will help. I did love the idea when somebody asked him if he had been paying attention to what was going on in Phoenix, and he had been in Minnesota for a couple of weeks, and he admitted not as much as he should, but he kind of dropped the line and he goes, I'm going to get back there, and I'm paraphrasing now, but I'm going to get back there and make an impact, is basically what he said. And I love that idea, because Larry's not going to go boasting about what kind of impact he can make, but he knows he can make one. And I think he understands that he has a role to play in all of this.
Which brings us to his identity in terms of this season, because it's a little bit different now, Kyle, when you talk about football. And he's identified more than ever as part of a combo in terms of DeAndre Hopkins and Larry Fitzgerald. And I saw where there was a ranking on the site, and fill us in from there. Someone came out with one of these offseason power polls, and they ranked the best wide receiver duos in the NFL. And let me guess, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin were number one?
Actually, no. The Browns, OBJ and Jarvis Landry are a couple that Kurt Warner and I think LaDainian Tomlinson picked.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it was more of a video, Paul, where it was a kind of a round table, and it was funny because Kurt Warner was talking about, he knows about duos because he was talking about playing with Fitz and Anquan Bolden once upon a time, and he mentioned OBJ and Jarvis Landry. But Steve Mariucci was the one who said, which surprised me a little bit, that he still sees DeAndre Hopkins and Larry Fitzgerald as being that duo.
That is interesting, because I'm not even sure, this might be blasphemy, is Larry the number 2 receiver?
I was going to say the same thing.
What do you expect in terms of the receiver rotation and targets, and how Cliff Kingsbury is going to design the offense, Kyle? Where does Christian Kirk fit in, you think?
Like you said, maybe that's an unpopular opinion, but you look at the numbers, targets per game, yards per game. Christian Kirk was ahead of Larry Fitzgerald in both last year. He didn't in aggregate because Christian Kirk missed 3 games, but considering he's going to be 24 this season, he's pushing toward his prime. Larry Fitzgerald is pushing away from it. So I expect Christian Kirk to be the number 2 and Larry Fitzgerald to be the number 3 if you base it on last year. Now, things can change year to year, but I feel like Christian Kirk was the guy that Kyler Murray looked to the most and had the most connection with. And I think you can use him in a lot of creative ways like Cliff Kingsbury did last year. So I feel like DeAndre Hopkins is obviously going to be the guy who gets the most targets, but I think Christian Kirk is going to get plenty himself, and then you have to make sure to keep Larry Fitzgerald involved too.
So if Larry, let's just say, ends up with a number 3 corner across from him, I mean, Darren, that is something Larry's been waiting his entire career for, and I would not be surprised whatsoever if Larry puts up some pretty significant stats if that's the case.
See, that's kind of how I'm like looking at it. Like, I mean, I think DeAndre Hopkins is your top receiver. I don't think anybody's going to argue that. But where it breaks down from there, I think there's a lot of factors. I agree with Kyle. I think Kyler Murray had a connection with Christian Kirk that felt as we went along that was maybe developed a little stronger than the one he has with Fitzgerald. And that's to be expected. They knew each other before he even got here. they're the same age. I know people don't want to look at it that way, but it makes sense to me. And where Larry might go from here, I do agree with you. If defenses start treating him like the number 3 receiver, I think that pushes all the advantage to Larry Fitzgerald, and I absolutely think he and Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray will take advantage of it.
I mean, just the fact that Christian Kirk has the burner speed, or at least he does have that ability to beat you deep, he would merit the number 2 corner, you would think, in most defensive game plans. So just based on that alone, Kyle, just the threat of a Christian Kirk, and all they have to do is turn on the Tampa game from a year ago, and he had 3 chunk play touchdowns, and you realize, okay, this is someone that's going to mandate that you put a corner who can run with him. And then with that in mind, you're going to have more of a slot corner probably on Larry. And we know Larry, if he's single covered against a smaller slot corner, his ability to get himself between you and the football and Kyler Murray as a third down option, I could see a lot of targets in that scenario.
Yeah, I think the targets will be there, and you talk about red zone. I think that's a good spot for Larry because, like you said, his catch radius against smaller guys. I don't think it's necessarily going to be people put the number 2 corner on Christian Kirk. I just feel like it's more about this guy plays outside corner, and that's where Christian's lining up now, and here's your nickel back. I don't think people are going to be moving them around necessarily, but you generally put your more talented corners on the outside if you can, because they have the skill set to play with those guys. And it could open things up for Larry Fitzgerald, as well as if the running game's working, then maybe he can get some one-on-one stuff. And we'll see how it goes. But I think there's certainly, we're not saying Larry Fitzgerald's totally discounted in this offense. There's a certain role for sure where there's scenarios where he's going to be a big part of it.
What's realistic, though, Darren? He is going into his 17th season, 37 years of age. On the other hand, he has DeAndre Hopkins pushing him. You can't tell me, as competitive as Larry is, and you see some of those workout videos, for example, DeAndre Hopkins posts, that you're not thinking, okay, there is a new 3-time All-Pro in camp. I think that raises the bar and pushes everyone on the Cardinals offense.
Oh, I agree with you. And honestly, if we're talking about Fitz, I don't, DeAndre Hopkins or not, I have no doubt that he was going to push himself. Fitz is the type of guy, he's not going to want to embarrass himself. He said multiple times, and I've talked to him about it too. He does not want to be leaving this game because he just lost it. He wants to leave the game on his own terms. We'll see if that happens, but he's going to do everything in his power. You even talked earlier about how he keeps track of those numbers of how he was when he was 25 or 31. Well, the reason he's doing that is to continue to measure himself, to see if he can continue to physically be at the same level he was and measure how whatever drop-off might be happening. And I think if he did notice a drop-off happening, he would take that into account. And the fact that he's still playing tells me that he doesn't see that happening. And I do think that he's got a chance to make some real strides statistically. But again, some of this it's not about want to, and it's not even necessarily about his abilities. Some of it's going to be about how the games go, where Kyler looks to throw the ball. If this team becomes some kind of offensive juggernaut, scoring 30 points a game or 35 points a game, his stats are going to be pretty good. And if for whatever reason they hit a bump, they're not, because of the limited touches. You have to have the ball to spread the ball around, I guess, for lack of a better way of explaining it. And I think this offense really has a chance to do that kind of damage. And if that happens, I think DeAndre Hopkins can have a big year, and I think Larry Fitzgerald can have a pretty good year. I'm not expecting 100 catches, but I don't see any reason why he can't have a very solid statistical season.
So, Kyle, as we wrap this up, is it realistic to think the Cardinals can come out firing? Look, no one has had a traditional offseason. No one's been able to be on the field. But the fact they're in year 2, Cliff Kingsbury's system, and you obviously have some veteran, proven performers on offense, do you think the Cardinals offense gets traction more than most? And maybe they have a slight advantage, especially over the 5 teams with new head coaches. And there are a number of teams with new coordinators and new systems being installed. To me, September, unlike a year ago, could be a time when the Cardinals flourish on offense out of the gate.
Yeah, I agree. I think when it comes down to it, like you play the Niners in week 1 and a lot of it's about personnel. Like it's going to be hard to flourish against a really excellent defense, but taking that out, considering that all these teams are on a level playing field and the defenses you're facing haven't been together either. So that makes it moot. And then you realize that all the continuity that's coming back with the coach and the quarterback and the schematics. So I expect that. I feel like they were finding a groove late in the season, and there's no reason to think they won't continue that and even elevate more, because you've got the same guys. You've got Kyler Murray a year under his belt, and now you've added DeAndre Hopkins. So I would be more surprised if they regressed just because of all those factors.
By the way, that Niners opener looks even more intriguing, does it not, after Kyle Shanahan got the 6-year contract extension? And you're reminded they scored 29.9 points per game last year, second in the NFL in scoring, second all-time in Niners history. That's saying something. That week 1 matchup, Darren, I mean, you think about it. In fact, my buddies who all grew up 49er fans, and they like to trash talk, and they send me texts. I'm like, well, what happened? You guys didn't want to hire Mike Singletary back, or Jim Tomsula, or maybe Chip Kelly? So the Niners have figured it out, and they're going to be here to stay with Kyle Shanahan.
Yeah, but that first game, how many people are going to be there, Paul? I mean, I got to admit, I'm curious to know how that goes, and obviously I'm not expecting full stadiums at any point during the season. Could it be even a little more different at the beginning of the season? All of a sudden, that's a place that could have really been rocking and rolling coming off an NFC Championship and opening night, and some of the air will be let out of that. So, and on top of it, the Cardinals played pretty well up there last year. So I'm very intrigued for that first game.
Yeah. Are they going to be coming off 4 preseason games? Are they coming off 2 preseason games? Think of all the questions. Are they pushing back the season? We've even seen reports about that possibility. But how much more are we going to know from August to September without an effective treatment, and certainly no real prospect of a vaccine by the end of the year? What exactly does that accomplish? Either you can navigate and maneuver your way through the pandemic and COVID-19, Kyle, or you can't, at least to me. And at some point, you gotta kick it off and give it a shot.
And I've been saying for a while, like, hey, we'll watch the other sports and see what happens, and there can be some cautionary tales. And now we hear all this baseball stuff. Like, is baseball going to have a season? Is the NBA at a point where they're going to get together? There's talk about them not wanting to play. So I thought we'd have these case studies to look at, and there's no pro sports yet. And at one point, will they start up? Because we're not too far from when training camp's supposed to start. So we'll see if there is some sports beforehand, but it could be a big guessing game for the NFL.
Golf and NASCAR, Kyle.
I guess if you put the football players in cars, would be okay.
NASCAR is going to allow 30,000 fans into Tennessee. So for the All-Star race, that is on the calendar. That's coming up. We'll see. The question is, who's first in line between the two of you to get the nose swab to the brain test? That's what I want to know. Which one of you is better equipped, mentally tougher, to handle the actual test itself, Darren?
You know what? We do what we have to do, Paul. And if making sure that we can go with best content on Cardinals Underground means a swab up the nose, so be it.
Right. That's right.
Aren't there alternative tests now where you don't have to do the swab? Can't we just work smarter, not harder?
That's right. Yeah. Whatever, Kyle. You guys are multimedia content providers. You can handle it, as we've proven for a good couple of years now here on Cardinals Underground.